Hey everyone, in today's video, I want to share 5 easy tips to help your students start writing complete sentences. Now, before I dive into this video, I do want to share just a few quick things about teaching writing that I think are going to be important to keep top of mind as we dive into this video. The first is that teaching sentence construction to our youngest students is necessary, like absolutely necessary, but it is not sufficient in teaching students how to write. Meaning that while we definitely need to teach our students how to write a sentence, what a sentence is, the different components of a sentence, and then once they can write a sentence, we need to teach them to stretch out a sentence and expand it with more details. But we cannot only teach them sentence writing and expect them to become great writers. We do need to balance it with other things like grammar instruction and the writing process, teaching them how to walk through those phases. We need to teach them how to write in different genres and why it might sound different. So we definitely need a balance of both. The second thing is that teaching grammar and mechanics in isolation has proven to not be as successful as teaching it within the context of writing. So while we do want our students to understand what a verb is and where punctuation goes, teaching them to simply identify it in unconnected sentences, for example, like just point out where they are, and then not having them actually practice it within the context of writing isn't as beneficial as teaching students how to do this within our writing. I just wanted to point out those 2 things before we dive into this video. And if you're wondering where I got that information from or where I'm getting my research, I want to share 3 great books that I love. I've learned quite a bit about a more structured writing approach. I used to absolutely love writing workshop, and there are plenty of pieces that I still take from my the way I used to teach writing and use now. But I also wanted to make sure that I was doing enough of a balance, meaning that I wasn't solely focused on the writing process and making sure we still had enough structured writing as well. So the 3 books that I absolutely love are first, The Writing Revolution by Judith Hochman and Natalie Wexler. When I first read this book, I was thinking it might be geared too high, specifically finding writing for K through 2 or writing instruction for K through 2 learners is difficult. But I was actually able to read this and take a lot that I can apply in younger classrooms. So this is the first one. The second book I've really enjoyed is Best Practices in Writing Instruction by Stephen Graham, Charles MacArthur, and Michael Hebert. And lastly, I love this book by David Coker. It's called Teaching Beginning Writers, again by David Coker and Kristen Ritchie. So I will link all 3 of these down in the description. If I had to pick 2, I would definitely say Writing Revolution and this one. This one I find very actionable, so maybe this one is number 1? I don't know. They're all great. You can take a look at the different descriptions on Amazon and see if you want to use any of these. But the information and research in these books are really what's guiding my writing videos. With all that being said, if you're ready for these 5 tips, give this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and let's go. Is one I've shared many times before and is one I probably won't stop sharing. It is oral language is key. In fact, I made an entire video about the importance of oral language as well as tons of oral language activities to help your students. That video right there. And in that video, I really expressed that before we expect our youngest learners to be able to write in complete sentences, they need to be able to speak in complete sentences. So when teaching students what a complete sentence is, we do want to let them know that there are 2 parts of a complete sentence. Sometimes people call it, the naming part and the telling part, the subject and the predicate. Sometimes they call it the actor and the acting. And we can even show students what a complete sentence looks like. And we can identify, oh, here's the naming part, here's the telling part, so they can see it in different contexts. But we don't want to leave out the part where students are actually producing complete sentences themselves. And again, this can really happen with oral language. Now, I already mentioned this oral language video because I give tons of ideas and examples of how to do this with your students to get them expressing their language orally. But one of the main times I love to do this is during our morning meeting. I will often pose a question to the class and guide students into answering using a complete sentence. So of course I will model speaking in a complete sentence. And if we are explicitly learning about sentence writing in our writing time, I'll bring it back to the morning meeting and say, oh, I want to share this in a complete sentence, so I want to make sure that I'm using a naming part and a telling part. You can of course scaffold this as well by providing your students with a sentence stem when beginning this type of activity. Not only is this a quick and kind of low stress activity for students, but this is also a great time to give quick corrective feedback to help students change fragments into sentences as needed, or to help them correct run-on sentences if that's what they're doing instead. And when you can quickly provide that feedback to your students and have them change it, it's so much easier of a process to get them to do it orally, as opposed to having them write down a fragment or write down a run-on sentence and then having them go back, try to change it to a complete sentence. We of course want to get there, and if they do that, we're going to teach them how to edit it. But thinking about doing this orally and really helping them develop an ear for what a complete sentence should sound like is going to help tremendously when your students go to writing. So tip 1 is oral language is key. All right, tip 2 is kind of a philosophy tip, but the tip is to temper your expectations. And now I do want to make clear that that doesn't mean don't hold your students to a high standard. You should absolutely have a high standard for your students and teach them accordingly, but it's just important to remember that these are kindergarten, first, and second grade students, and that teaching writing and writing in general is a forever process. Like forever. I don't know many adults that could look at themselves and say, oh, I am an exemplary writer. I don't have any more to learn. I know exactly how to use all the different writing things there are out there. I know how to use them properly. I always write correctly. Like, no, that's not realistic. While all areas of education should focus on growth, I think writing, more than any other subject, is really focused on that process and how much we have grown as a writer from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And as the teacher, it's important that we get in the right mindset and understand what our K-2 learners' writing is actually supposed to look like. So how can we turn that into some actionable tips? Well, first and foremost, this is just a recommendation, but in terms of planning within your own classroom with your colleagues, I really love to focus on writing both horizontally and vertically. So what I mean by that is within your first grade team, for example, you guys should kind of get together and have a common idea of what an exemplary first grade writing piece should look like based on what you're teaching. And then you can also talk about what an average piece might look like, as well as what one that needs a lot of work might look like. That way you're just all on the same page. And then also I like to talk about writing from a vertical standpoint as well, because it can really help within your own school if you want to do it just a few grade levels at a time. But essentially with some vertical planning, you could actually spread out what standards are most important to teach going on to the next grade level. And again, we have the Common Core standards, so we know what we should be teaching if your school follows along with those each year in writing, but it would be helpful for second grade teachers to say, hey, this is what we as the first grade team decided is an exemplary piece of writing. And just so you know, this is what our writing that needs work. Here's what it looked like at the beginning of the year. Here's now what it looks like at the end of the year. This would really help them kind of see just how far, and again, focus on that growth that their students have come before they've gotten into second grade. Or maybe your second grade teachers are like, listen, first grade teachers, I love the writing that they're producing, but something is going on with their punctuation. They're not remembering to add punctuation. And again, this isn't done with like any judgment. It's more of a great time to just meet up with them and discuss like, okay, second grade teachers, what could we do for you to help make your life easier? You know, kindergarten doing the same. I would personally recommend if my kindergarten teachers could really focus on handwriting and make handwriting fluent. We could then move on to more difficult things in first grade. And if they have fluent handwriting, we can kind of lessen that load mentally and, apply it to writing complete sentences, adding conjunctions, and all the other aspects of writing. So while it's definitely not necessary, it is something I've done in the past at different schools, both working horizontally with my grade level team to figure out, what that writing should look like. And then also at another school, I have done the vertical alignment as well. And that's also really helpful to hear the grade level teachers behind you as well as in front of you. Just to, again, so you're all on the same page of where these students are starting and where they're heading. Now, in terms of what this might look like for you individually, number one, you definitely want to focus on the growth. Of course, if this is going to be your new mindset, you want to not only focus on growth with your individual students, but also praise growth as well. You want to be able to physically show them, oh my gosh, look at, you wrote this complete sentence, you have punctuation at the end. Let's take a look a few months ago, right? And see what you were able to do then. Look at how far you've come. This is amazing, so on and so forth. And a portfolio or some sort of student writing journal is great for really noticing those things. Another helpful thing is when you are teaching writing process lessons, like maybe we are teaching students how to go back and revise, or maybe we are teaching students a writing genre, what it might sound like. This is a great time to rely on inventive spelling. Now, inventive spelling, I've done a whole video on it right here, and its importance and its place in the writing block of teaching. Because if we waited for our writers to become proficient spellers in kindergarten, first and second grade, we wouldn't be writing, right? I mean, any K-2 teacher knows their students cannot master all of the phonics patterns we are teaching them, completely to then be able to write it. So we do need to rely on inventive spelling to further our students' writing. This thought goes perfectly with that balance I mentioned earlier about teaching students structured writing lessons, but then also having that balance of teaching them the writing process. They need to learn it both. And again, just to make it completely clear, that does not mean you aren't teaching your students how to spell. You absolutely should be doing that. You are teaching your students all different phonics patterns and how to encode them. And the goal is they will take those phonics patterns and apply them in their writing when they've been mastered. But again, you can go check out that video if you want to know more about that. And also, last but not least for this tip, please remember that drawings in dictation are also the story. Again, if we're really focusing on growth and tempering those expectations, we need to always remind ourselves, especially in kindergarten, that drawing and dictation are in the Common Core standards in terms of storytelling. And in first and second grade, you have to, again, focus on that growth and think about where your students might be to see if they can still tell stories using that oral language. Maybe they're able to draw those stories better than they're able to write them at this point in time. So those ideas should be praised as well. All right, tip number 3 is to model, model, model. Now, I have always talked about the importance of modeling our writing in front of our students. This should always be part of our explicit instruction. Again, if I'm going to teach you what a sentence looks like and sounds like, I'm also going to think aloud and actually walk you through writing a sentence. In fact, modeling is such a big part of my writing instruction that I made it a huge part of my lessons in the SJT Writing Club. In the club, every single one of my genre-based units has me explaining, it has like a dictated lesson plan of what I would do. And then when I say model how to write the sentence, I actually include a picture of what I would do in front of the class. And you could totally just copy that or use it as a baseline in making your own. But pretty much I model every single lesson and what it's going to look like so my students have clear expectations. So when it comes to sentence writing specifically, thinking aloud is a great place to start. Thinking aloud and then showing students how you would write that sentence. But also in Coker's book right here, Teaching Beginning Writers, he has some steps you can walk through specifically so you can see what this might look like. When doing this with your students, step 1 would be to explain the task. So you might say, today we're going to write about our field trip to the music theater. Number 2 is you're going to model generating the sentence aloud. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to write my first sentence. The sentence is going to be, yesterday, our class went to the music theater. So here, not only am I setting the purpose and telling our students what we're going to do, but I'm also modeling that oral language part where I say my sentence out loud. Step 3 is where I'm going to model counting how many words are in the sentence. Now, this is going to differ based on the way you teach students how to write. I have a whole process I usually follow, and in my sentence writing unit, I use this anchor chart right here, where first I say the sentence aloud, I count out how many words are in it. Towards the beginning of the year, I definitely will have students draw lines. This is just to help them remember how many words are in the sentence. Then we actually write the words on the lines, and then we read it back to make sure it makes sense. That anchor chart in the sentence writing unit I will link down below, but step 3 of this process is to basically count the words aloud so students remember, how many words they're actually going to be writing. Step 4 is where you model writing down each word. Again, when you're doing this, you are thinking aloud, using phonics knowledge to help you spell the words. You're also going to think aloud as you write, 2 or 3 words down, and then you're going to say the sentence aloud again to figure out where you are. You're going to model that entire process. Also, during this time, since you are starting your sentence, you will model using a capital letter at the beginning. Step 5 is to model using end punctuation, and then step 6 is to model reading it back to check that it makes sense. Following those quick 5 steps will help your students really see the process of writing a sentence, right? Setting our purpose for it, using oral language to say it out loud, counting the words, writing them down, making sure we have all those mechanics, and then reading it back to make sure it makes sense. With any subject in K-2, it's really important to model our expectations, but in writing, I think it's the most important. Model, model, model. Tip 4 is to use scaffolded writing activities to help students understand sentence type, sentence structure, and revision strategies. These types of activities are really going to help our students understand syntax and different sentence types. So just for some examples, some of these activities would include sentence scrambles. Sentence scrambles are a great way for students to really understand and identify capital letters, end punctuation, and learn the importance of word order and syntax. I've talked about these before, but I would start doing these whole groups so you can really discuss this with your class, and then you can move it on into a small group or independent activity as long as students can read the words in the sentence. The one I'm showing you right here are from my decodable sentence scrambles that students can do, and these are based on phonics patterns, so you could definitely print these out and use them independently after students know how to do them, and you can differentiate based on their phonics pattern. But basically with a sentence scramble, students will see the different words all spread out and mixed up in order, and they will have to figure out what order the words go in for it to make sense. Now, if an activity like that is too difficult for some of your students, to kind of scale it back and make it a little easier, you can actually start with having the naming part and the telling part on 2 different sentence strips, and they just have to put them in the correct order, right? There's only 2 options and they have to decide which one makes sense. Again, they're developing that ear for what a correct sentence should sound like, and they're also looking for things like end punctuation and beginning capitalization as well. Another option to make this a little bit easier would be to give self-correcting sentence scrambles where students can try to do it themselves and then they can flip it over, and on the back they'll be numbered in order so they can see if they were correct. On the flip side, if you want to make this a little more difficult for some of your students, you can add in some extra words there that might not make any sense, and students have to figure out. I would tell them first that there's a word in there that doesn't belong, and they can figure out what word that is. Or you can throw in things like a bunch of different end punctuation marks after students have learned the different types of punctuation and the different types of sentences. And not only do they have to put the sentence together, but they have to decide what correct punctuation goes at the end. Speaking of sentence types, another scaffolded activity is to learn about all 4 different types of sentences and to start identifying them in stories. So after we learn about declarative, interrogative, imperative, and exclamatory sentences, students will have to start identifying them in a story. Now again, this is definitely something I would do whole group, and I probably wouldn't read a story aloud and just expect them to automatically shout out and know, what a random sentence is, but I could pick a few from a story we're reading and I could write them on the board and we can kind of discuss and figure out which one is which and how we know. Also, using different types of sentences, you can have your students do a sentence type sort where they are sorting the sentences based on the type. Another type of scaffolded activity you can use with your students are sentence combinations. So here students are essentially taking 2 different sentences and combining them, but instead of just doing it, on their own, I like to make it a little more structured by giving them the exact conjunction that I want them to use. So maybe they'll be using and, but, because. I also like to do this with a list, having students use a series of commas, which of course is a 1st grade standard. Those sentence activities I have had in the SJT Writing Club, but I actually recently just put them on TBT due to a bunch of requests, so I'll go ahead and link those in the description in case you want to check them out. Last but not least, tip number 5 is to teach editing at the sentence level. Now, we don't need to wait until our students are writing much longer stories to go back and edit what they've been writing. In fact, editing at the sentence level is a great place to start. Now, with K through 2 students, the 2 most common types of errors are having sentence fragments, where they're not writing a complete sentence, or having run-on sentences, where they're adding way too many ideas into one big long sentence that doesn't make sense. With both of those things, again, modeling is going to really help so students understand the difference between a fragment and a complete sentence, and then also modeling those run-on sentences. You can do that in that exaggerated way where, oh my gosh, I just can't take a breath, where we talk about our punctuation allows the reader to take a breath, pause, and then move on to the next ideas. But also when it comes to modeling, we want to actually show our students how we can look at a sentence and check it for different things. Now, there's a bunch of different editing anchor charts that we have out there. COPS is a popular one. I particularly like CUPS, where we have the C stands for capitalization, the U stands for understanding, the P is punctuation, and then the S is spelling. And I like to use an anchor chart like this one with my students to show them what we need to check for after we write a sentence. We always want to check for, does it have that beginning capitalization? And then as students learn other things like names need to be capitalized, dates, places of proper nouns, etc., we'll check for all the capitalization. We of course always reread our story to make sure it makes sense. We check for proper punctuation, whatever punctuation students have learned at that time. And then we check for spelling. And again, with spelling, what we're looking for is that they've applied the phonics patterns that they know. By using something clever like cups or cops or whatever catchy thing you can come up with, it just helps students consistently go back and get used to editing each sentence. Now, of course, as they get older and they write longer pieces, they maybe don't need to go back and edit every single sentence, like specifically going through the checklist. But what we're doing is we're creating writers who are used to checking for those things and are used to adding those things to their writing in the first place. So having our students go back and edit at the sentence level is a great place to start. I actually went ahead and made a free little cups anchor chart for you to display in your own classroom, and it also comes with a few half-page sheets. If you have students use a writing notebook or a writing folder, they can keep it in there to reference throughout their writing time. Like usual, I will go ahead and link that down in the description. So there you have 5 tips for helping your students write complete sentences. Just to quickly review them one more time, we have number 1, oral language is key. Don't forget to have your students say those sentences aloud before they write them down. Number 2, set realistic expectations or temper your expectations. Number 3, model, model, model. Number 4 is to teach sentence structure through scaffolded activities. And number 5 is to teach editing at the sentence level. I hope this video really helps you feel more confident in teaching your students how to write. It is definitely something I have been focused on the last few years, kind of moving from a more free-flowing writing workshop model to still incorporating many of the same types of activities and lessons I would do during writing workshop, but also making them more structured. So really focusing on that explicit instruction is key. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up so I know. Make sure you are subscribed to my channel and click that bell. That way you're notified of every new video. See you in the next one. Bye.